Sometimes you don't even realize you've been waiting until something in you starts to ache. She still folded his shirt every week. Same drawer, same scent. Like nothing had changed. The others stopped asking after a while, like grief had an expiration date. But she remembered every word he didn't say. No one talked about what happened that night in the woods. They just looked away. Even she couldn't explain why her hands wouldn't stop shaking when the wind shifted. But if he had truly let her go, why did his shadow return before hers ever did? Chapter 1. The Girl Who Couldn't Shift. The morning had come cold and pale, with frost curling along the cabin window like thin white vines. Elira watched it from the small table where she sat, her fingers pressed around a chipped mug of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the forest murmured, the same steady rustle she had heard her whole life, but the sound no longer comforted her. The others would be running by now, their paws pounding through the first snow of winter, their laughter echoing against the cliffs. She had not run with them in years. She listened for the howl that always came before dawn, the one that marked the start of pack training. It never used to sting. But lately, the sound made her chest tighten. She sipped her tea, forcing herself not to look at the space by the door where her mother's cloak once hung. The house had grown quieter since the last shifting season. Her mother had stopped waiting by the window. Her father spoke little except when there were chores to divide or scorn to deliver. When she had turned 13 and nothing had happened, they said it was just nerves. When 16 passed, they said the moon had its own timing. But by 21, the whispers grew sharper. A wolf without a wolf isn't really one of us. They thought she couldn't hear, but every word had found its way through thin walls. That morning, Elira tied her hair back and pulled on her shawl. She had work to do at the healer's hut, gathering herbs, cleaning jars, tending to the sick pups who came down from the northern caves. She liked the quiet there. It was the only place where no one asked her about shifting. The door creaked as she opened it, and a gust of winter air swept through. The red pine banners hung limp over the distant houses, each marked with the silver crest of the Alpha's line. From here she could almost see the training field. Once she had dreamed of standing there beside Kellen, the boy who used to smile when she couldn't keep up. He had promised once that the moon would never forget her, that she only needed to wait. Now he was the soon-to-be Alpha, and his mark rested on someone else's neck. Elira stepped into the snow, forcing herself to breathe through the dull ache that rose in her throat. She wouldn't let them see her break. Not now, not when everyone already believed she had nothing left to offer. At the healer's hut, Mira greeted her with a nod. The older woman was one of the few who never treated Elira like a mistake. "You're early," Mira said, her voice gentle. "Couldn't sleep," Elira answered. She set down her basket and began sorting herbs, her movements practiced and neat. Mira watched her for a moment before speaking again. "It's the coronation soon." Elira nodded without looking up. "I know." "He'll make a strong Alpha," Mira said carefully, as though testing the ground between them. "He already was," Elira replied. The words were calm, steady, but her hands trembled slightly when she reached for the glass jars. Mira's gaze softened. "Some bonds aren't meant to last, child. That doesn't make them any less real." Elira didn't answer. The truth was she had never spoken of what she and Kellen once shared. They had grown up side by side, training, hunting, laughing under the same moon. But somewhere along the way, his eyes began to slide past her. Her unshifted nature became a shadow between them. When his mark finally found its place on another woman's skin, Elira said nothing. She even sewed the new Lunar's coronation gown herself. It was the only way to keep her hands from shaking. The days passed in quiet repetition. She rose before dawn, tended the sick, fetched water, and mended torn cloaks. Her father's disappointment became background noise, like the wind or the creek outside their cabin. He had stopped calling her by name years ago. To him, she was just girl. Every full moon, she still walked to the cliffs alone. It was an old habit, one she couldn't explain. The path was steep, winding through pine and frostweed, but she knew every step. There, where the forest opened to the sky, she could see the valley spread below, the lights of red pine flickering like distant embers. The cliffs were where the young wolves learned to leap when they first shifted, gliding through the air with their new forms. She had stood there once, trembling and waiting for the change that never came. Tonight, she came again. The moon hung low and wide, casting the snow in soft blue light. Elira wrapped her shawl tighter, breathing through the cold. The wind carried faint howls from the valley, celebration songs for Kellen's new lunar. She tried not to listen, but the sound threaded through her like thin glass. She knelt near the edge, touching the ground where the rock was still scarred from old claws. Once her mother had stood here beside her, whispering prayers to the moon spirit. "When the time is right," she had said, "you'll feel it under your skin, like the earth remembering your name." That was before the hope died in her eyes, before her father started drinking, before Elira learned to move quietly enough not to draw attention. She sat there until her legs went numb. When she finally rose, the air felt different, heavier. A sound moved through the trees, a hum, low and strange, like the earth was breathing. She turned slowly, scanning the darkness. Nothing but wind and pine, yet her pulse quickened. By the time she returned home, the candles had burned low. Her father was asleep by the fire, his arm hanging off the chair. She walked past him, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet, and paused by her small window. The hum was still in her chest, faint but certain, like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She pressed a hand to her ribs, startled by the warmth under her skin. "Just cold," she whispered to herself. But it didn't fade. The following days unfolded quietly. The pack prepared for Luna's coronation, a grand celebration with visiting alphas from neighbouring territories. Banners were hung, silver-threaded cloaks stitched, drums rehearsed. Elira worked late each night under Mira's guidance, embroidering patterns she'd never wear. By the third night, the hum returned. Stronger this time, she woke gasping, her palms hot, and her heartbeat loud in her ears. When she tried to steady herself, she heard something faint in the distance, a sound that wasn't quite human, not quite animal. It stopped the moment she whispered, "Who's there?" The next morning, while hanging dried herbs, she overheard two guards speaking outside the healer's hut. "They say the palace is summoning candidates for the bond trials," one said. "The Alpha King?" the other asked. "He hasn't bonded with anyone in years. Word is he's searching beyond the noble packs this time, even among the lower ranks." Elira froze, her hands stilling over the herbs. The palace never called for lower wolves. The trials were sacred, meant for the strongest, the most gifted. Mira entered then, her brow furrowed. "Elira," she said softly, "a messenger came while you were out." Elira turned. "For me?" Mira handed her a folded parchment sealed with wax, stamped in the shape of a crescent. "From the capital." Elira's fingers shook as she broke it open. The words were written in formal script. By order of the High Council and decree of the Alpha King, Elira of Red Pine is hereby summoned to the royal grounds for evaluation and service under the sacred bond trials. She read it twice before she could breathe. "There must be a mistake," she said. "They don't call wolves like me." Mira looked at her quietly. "Maybe they do now." That night, Elira packed in silence, a single satchel, a spare cloak, a locket that had belonged to her mother. Her father didn't speak a word when she told him. He only muttered, "They'll send you back in a week." She didn't argue. At dawn, she walked to the edge of the village. The road stretched long and pale toward the northern hills, where the palace towers cut against the horizon. The snow crunched under her boots. Every step felt heavier, not from fear, but from the strange, growing certainty that something had already begun to move inside her. As the village faded behind her, she looked back one last time. Smoke rose from the chimneys. The sound of howling drifted faintly across the wind, her pack's farewell to their new lunar. Elira didn't join in. Instead, she whispered to the cold air, "If I was never meant to shift, then why does it feel like I already have?" The hum returned, deep and steady beneath her ribs, and far ahead, beyond the horizon, the palace bells began to ring. Chapter 2. The Palace Tests the Broken. Elira stood at the palace gates with snow clinging to the hem of her cloak. Her boots were damp. Her fingers ached from holding her satchel too tightly. She couldn't feel her toes, but that wasn't what bothered her most. What unsettled her was the silence. The palace guards didn't speak when they read her summons. They simply opened the iron gates and waved her in. Past marble columns and tall blue banners embroidered with the royal crest, past windows so clean they reflected the winter sky like mirrors. She half expected someone to stop her, to say a mistake had been made, but no one did. Instead, she was escorted to a cold stone hallway where other wolves were already gathered. They looked nothing like her. Tall, golden, confident. They wore fine cloaks, silver-tipped boots. Some even flaunted visible bond marks already etched along their wrists or collarbones. A few turned to glance at her, and then came the sound she knew too well. Laughter. "Another charity case," someone muttered. "She's from Red Pine, isn't she?" Another whispered behind a gloved hand. "They say she never shifted." Not once. Elira kept her eyes down. A girl with bright copper hair leaned in closer and asked, voice too loud, "Did they really call you the Null?" Elira didn't answer. She was led to a bare chamber with a cot and a wool blanket. No welcome, no explanation, just orders to be ready by dawn. The first trial began before sunrise. A ringing bell echoed through the east wing. Elira followed the others down a long hall, past balconies where advisors stood watching from above. They were herded into a glass-walled courtyard, where a layer of frost coated the stone floor. A man in ceremonial grey barked instructions. "You will be tested not just for strength, but endurance. Not just for loyalty, but instinct. Some of you will shift. Some of you will fail. Do not ask when your turn ends." Elira lined up with the rest. Her heart thudded in her throat. The physical trial was brutal. Climbing rope walls with frozen hands, running barefoot through snow-dusted fields, holding breath under frigid water. Some collapsed. Others shifted mid-trial, their wolves howling in triumph as their limbs bent and snapped. Elira stayed human. Her body ached, her vision blurred, but she didn't fall. When it ended, the copper-haired girl sneered. "You really are empty, aren't you?" The second day was worse. Emotional resonance. They sat in silence, one by one, while a psychic whispered memories into their minds, meant to provoke the wolf's rise. The boy before her wept. The girl after her screamed and shifted. When it was Elira's turn, the woman leaned close and whispered something only she could hear. "She never wanted you, you know. She just didn't know how to leave." The words stabbed deeper than any blade. But Elira didn't shift. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. But no howl came. By the third day, she'd earned a reputation. She doesn't fight. She doesn't cry. She doesn't feel. But that wasn't true. She felt everything. She just didn't show it. That night, she lay awake on the narrow cot. Her limbs sore, her throat raw from holding back a scream that had nowhere to go. The others slept soundly. Some talked in their sleep. A few murmured names. Elira only watched the ceiling, counting the cracks between the stones. By the fourth day, her feet were blistered. Her arms barely lifted the weighted blade she was handed. She failed the trial within minutes, her opponent knocking the weapon from her grip with barely any effort. The guards didn't jeer. They didn't need to. The silence around her was enough. "You can go now," one of them said afterward. There's no place for nulls in the court. She nodded, but instead of returning to her room, she walked toward the garden. No one stopped her. The inner courtyard was hidden behind carved oak doors, reserved for high-ranked candidates or council members. But she slipped in without sound. The garden was quiet, too quiet for the palace. Snow blanketed the ground. Branches curled bare toward the sky. At the center stood an old ash tree, its bark pale against the dark stones. Elira didn't know why she walked to it. She just needed to breathe. To be somewhere that didn't remind her of all she lacked. She sat beneath the tree, her cloak tugged tight around her shoulders. Her skin was flushed with cold, but she didn't shiver. The ache in her chest had settled into something heavy, something permanent. Then she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. She looked up and froze. A man stood a few paces away. He wasn't dressed like the others. No armor, no crest, just a black coat with fur lining at the collar. His posture was relaxed, but there was something about the way he held himself. Still, composed, as if the world moved around him and not the other way around. Elira blinked. He looked too young to be the Alpha King. And yet, he didn't speak, just studied her with steady eyes. She dropped her gaze. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize this place was reserved." Still, he didn't say a word. Elira rose slowly, brushing frost from her skirt. Her heart was loud in her ears. "I'll leave." "You failed the trials." His voice was calm, deep, not judgmental, just factual. She nodded. "Yes. And yet, you're still here." She met his eyes, grey, sharp, not cold but unreadable. "I didn't know where else to go." For a moment neither of them moved. The wind curled around them gently. "You didn't shift," he said quietly. Elira's throat tightened. "No." His gaze dropped to her hands where her knuckles were scraped from the trials. "But you didn't quit." She said nothing. He stepped closer, not threatening, more like he was drawn forward by something he couldn't name. "You're not like the others," he murmured. Elira forced a smile. "I know. That's why they call me the Null." His expression didn't change, but his eyes, they didn't laugh. They didn't pity her. They looked like they remembered something. Something old. Something lost. He studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "You shouldn't be here." Elira felt the words like a door closing. She nodded and turned to go, but just as her hand touched the frost-covered branch beside her, she heard him speak again. "But neither should I." She turned. He was still watching her, and for the first time since arriving, she didn't feel like a mistake. She felt seen. And for a moment, just a moment, the hum returned beneath her ribs, stronger this time, like it recognized him. Chapter 3. The Alpha King watches in silence. They said King Theron never lingered. He was known to enter a room, speak only what was needed, and leave without hesitation. No small talk, no indulgence. Every move had purpose. Every silence carried weight. Council members learned quickly to only speak when asked. Candidates kept their eyes lowered unless addressed directly. Servants cleared his path before he arrived. So when Elira saw him standing at the edge of the training yard that morning, arms crossed, expression unreadable, she told herself he must have been passing through. She kept her focus on the wooden dummy in front of her. Her grip on the training staff was already slipping from the blisters. The instructor hadn't bothered correcting her stance. He'd long since given up. She was just the girl who couldn't shift. No one expected her to last beyond the next round of cuts. Still, she swung again, missed the mark. The staff clacked against the edge of the post. Behind her, someone whispered, "Why does he keep watching her?" Elira's pulse jumped. She looked up quickly, too quickly, and caught it. A glance, not accidental, not casual. King Theron's eyes were on her, not on the others sparring in perfect form, not on the twins from the Gold Claw pack who had both shifted mid-lunge. On her, the one who didn't belong. She lowered her gaze at once, heart thudding. He said nothing. He didn't move. But when she passed by the next day in the corridor leading to the archives, he was there again. Alone. Brows slightly furrowed, like he was thinking through something he couldn't name. The third time was harder, to ignore. It was during bonding trial evaluations. Elira had not been chosen to stand, only to observe. The room was wide, domed, filled with candles and silent tension. The chosen pairs stood under the priest's hands, waiting for the marks to appear. Most didn't. One did. A girl from the western border cried as the faint gold shimmer rose on her arm. Applause followed. Elira felt hollow as usual, until her eyes drifted to the viewing platform above. He was there, standing behind the council, not seated, not smiling, just watching. And when she shifted in her seat, uneasy, his eyes met hers again. This time he didn't look away. She didn't sleep that night. No one had spoken to her about him. No guards pulled her aside. No advisor whispered warnings. But the others had noticed. A few began avoiding her entirely, like she carried something contagious. Others snickered behind their palms. "He's curious," one said, "like a king studying a strange insect." Elira tried to ignore them. She focused on her chores, scrubbing armor, restacking books, assisting in healing chambers when needed. But the more she tried to blend in, the more his presence seemed to follow her. Once she entered the old reading chamber in the West Wing, only to find him already there, alone, reading a weathered scroll. He looked up. She froze. "You're early," he said. It was the first time he'd spoken to her since the garden. "I didn't know anyone used this room," she said quietly. "I do," he replied. "When I want silence." She nodded, turned to leave. "You don't speak unless you have to," he said. She paused. "No one ever listened when I did," she answered honestly, a beat of quiet. "I would," he said. She didn't understand what he meant by that, so she left. That night she couldn't keep the warmth out of her chest. It wasn't desire, it wasn't comfort. It was confusion, unease, and something that felt dangerously like hope. It built slowly after that. Small things. She'd find fresh bandages replaced on her cot after a hard trial. An extra coat hung near her door on the coldest morning. She never saw who left them. Once she dropped a flask in the training yard, and before she could reach it, someone picked it up and handed it to her. King Theron. No words, just a quiet offering before he walked away. The whispers grew louder. "You think she's his pick? He'd never take someone like her." Maybe it's pity, or guilt. Elira tried not to let the words in, but they found cracks. She started avoiding places she thought he might be, skipped dinner early, spent more time in the outer gardens where few dared tread after dusk. Her instincts told her to hide, but her pulse betrayed her. Every time she thought of him, it quickened. Her wolf, or whatever was left of it, stirred faintly. On the fifth evening, a guard appeared outside her door. "The king has summoned you." She stood frozen. "To the council chamber?" "No," the guard said. "To his private hall." No instructions, no escort, just a door left ajar in the eastern wing, guarded only by silence. She stepped inside. The room was vast but quiet. No tapestries, no weapons, just books, a fire, and one chair near the window. He stood at the window, arms behind his back. "You came," he said, not turning. "You summoned me," she answered. Finally he turned to face her. His hair looked darker in the firelight, his jaw tighter than usual. "I don't summon most people," he said, "only the ones I need to speak to." She didn't move from the threshold. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully, as if she might vanish. "I've seen you try, I've seen you fail," he said. Her breath caught. "I've also seen you stay." Elira swallowed. "I stay because I don't know where else to go." He nodded, as if he understood. Then came the question, "Do you feel it too?" The room went still. Her chest ached suddenly, not with pain, but with recognition. She didn't understand it, not fully, but she knew she wasn't imagining it. The pull, the weight in the air when he entered a room, the way her heart settled when his eyes met hers. "I don't know what I feel," she whispered. She took a shaky breath. "I just know. It doesn't hurt when you're near." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then something shifted in his expression. His jaw tightened, not in frustration, but restraint. His eyes flicked toward the base of her throat, then back to her face. And in that instant, she saw it. Not curiosity, not pity. Recognition. As if his wolf had seen hers long ago, before either of them had names, before trials, before crowns. She felt the hum again, low in her chest, a warmth that had no words. He looked away first, back to the window, and though he said nothing more, she could tell he felt it too. Chapter 4. A bond that shouldn't exist. The announcement came at dawn. The final trial was over, and Elira's name was not among the chosen. She stood in the courtyard with her satchel already packed, her breath clouding in the cold air as the others celebrated. The remaining candidates, those who had shifted or nearly had, laughed in bright, ringing tones that carried through the stone arches. Their joy was sharp enough to cut. "You'll find work in the outer provinces," one girl told her sweetly, "maybe as a servant." Elira only nodded. There was no point arguing. She had failed every test. The last one, the trial of the spirit, had ended before it even began. Her heartbeat had been steady. Her wolf, silent. Still, she had stayed until the end. Now she watched the others cluster near the dais, where King Theron stood. They smiled too easily, leaned too close. Their laughter rose like perfume, meant to be noticed. He said little in response. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but when his gaze passed over the crowd, Elira's heart stilled. For just a moment, his eyes lingered on her. Then he turned away. It should have meant nothing, but it didn't. By nightfall, she was ready to leave. Her belongings fit into a single worn satchel. 2 cloaks, a small knife, and her mother's old locket. She made her way to the departure board, where the scribe was finalizing the list. Each name meant freedom or failure, depending on who you asked. She scanned the parchment. Her name wasn't there. She frowned. "Excuse me," she said softly. "There must be a mistake. I'm supposed to leave tonight." The scribe, a thin man with an impatient sigh, double-checked the scroll. "Not here," he muttered. "If your name isn't listed, it means your release was overruled." "By who?" He glanced up, irritation melting into unease. "By the king's seal." Elira's stomach tightened. "Why?" He shrugged. "Ask him yourself, if you dare." She didn't. She simply turned away, clutching her satchel. That night she dreamed for the first time in years. It wasn't the usual fragments of memory or pain. It was something else, too vivid, too clear. She stood in the middle of a forest she didn't recognize. The air smelled of pine and earth. Snow glittered faintly on the branches. Somewhere far off, a howl rose, a long, low sound that tugged at something deep in her chest. Then came movement. From the shadow of the trees, a figure stepped forward. A wolf, large, dark, amber eyes that watched her without blinking. It circled her once, slow and deliberate, close enough that she could feel the brush of its breath. But it didn't touch her, didn't attack. It just looked at her. When she woke, her skin was damp with sweat, though her body was cool to the touch. The court healer was called the next morning when she nearly collapsed during chores. They said she was fevered. The healer pressed a hand to her forehead, frowned, and shook his head. "No heat," he murmured, "but something's moving beneath her pulse. Rest for now." Something was moving. It began as a tremor beneath her skin, a faint vibration that came and went like a second heartbeat. By the third night, it grew stronger. She could smell things that weren't there before, The faint oil on the guard's armor, the damp stone of the halls, the metallic tang of rain long before it fell. She heard footsteps where none should echo, voices 2 rooms away. Her senses sharpened like a blade honed in secret. No one told her what was happening. They only watched her differently now, uneasy, curious, half afraid. Only one person didn't look away. Theron. He began appearing again, quietly without announcement. Once in the corridor outside the East Wing, once in the library, again at the training grounds. Always alone, always silent. At first, Elira thought it coincidence. Then he began to speak. Small questions, unexpected ones. "What do you fear most?" he asked one afternoon when she was restocking herbs in the healer's hall. She startled at the sound of his voice. "Losing what I haven't even found yet," she said before she could stop herself. He nodded slowly as if the answer made perfect sense. "Another day," he asked. "What do you remember of your childhood?" She hesitated. Not much before Red Pine. Just darkness, and a voice telling me to be quiet. He didn't press her. The strangest question came one evening when she thought she was alone in the library. The candles had burned low and she was tracing the spine of a weathered book when she heard his voice behind her. "What do you dream about?" She turned. He stood near the doorway, arms relaxed at his sides, expression unreadable. Elira swallowed. "Lately? The woods." His eyes sharpened slightly. "And? There's a wolf," she said. "Amber eyes. It circles me but never touches." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he took a slow breath. "You're not fevered." She frowned. "How would you know?" "Because I dream of the same forest," he said quietly. Her pulse skipped. He didn't explain further and she didn't ask. But after that, something changed between them. It wasn't visible. It wasn't spoken. It simply lived in the air when they shared a room. A weight. A pull. Even the guards began to notice. They pretended not to see when he passed too close to her in the corridor, or when his gaze lingered half a second too long during assembly. But whispers spread quickly in the palace. "She's still here?" She failed every trial. The king overruled her dismissal. Why? Elira heard every word. Still, she stayed quiet. Her instincts had never been stronger. She could sense the smallest shift in mood, smell the salt of fear before it broke through someone's voice. She knew when Theron was near without looking. The air itself changed, thicker somehow, steadier. She didn't know how to explain it. One night, after a long day of study, she lingered outside the council chamber listening to the echo of his voice through the closed door. The tone was calm, commanding, but beneath it was something else. Tiredness, maybe. Or restraint. When the door opened and the council filed out, he stopped when he saw her. "Waiting for someone?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I was leaving." He tilted his head slightly. "Then stay a moment." He walked ahead of her, down a narrow corridor that led to a private balcony overlooking the gardens. The moonlight painted his profile in silver. She followed, heart steady and loud. He turned then, resting his hands on the stone railing. "You've changed," he said quietly. She tried to smile. "Everyone changes here." "Not like this." He studied her face, his gaze tracing something she couldn't see. "Your senses are sharper. You move differently?" "I don't understand why," she said, voice small. "I haven't shifted. Not really. But something's happening inside me." He nodded slowly. "It's not the trials doing this. Then what is?" He didn't answer. His eyes held hers and she felt that strange hum again, deep under her skin. It pulsed once like a heartbeat not her own. "Tell me something," she said, barely above a whisper. "Can a wolf be born silent?" He didn't reply at first. His expression changed, something flickering behind his eyes too quick to name. He looked away toward the moon. Then, quietly, he said, "Mine was." The words hung between them, heavy and soft. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard right. I mean, he said, turning back to her. I've never heard him. Not once. The other alphas, they speak of the voice in their blood, the pull, the instinct. Mine never came. Since when? Since I was a boy. His jaw flexed slightly. They called it control, said it made me stronger, but it isn't strength, is it? Elira felt the air tighten around them. No, she whispered. It's loneliness. His gaze met hers again, steady now. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It felt alive, like the space between two heartbeats waiting to sync. And for the first time since she'd come to the palace, Elira didn't feel broken. She felt understood. The night wind moved through the balcony, cold but gentle. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, mournful, familiar. Theron closed his eyes for just a moment, and when he opened them again, there was something new in his stare. Not a command, not pity, recognition. And Elira knew, deep in her bones, that whatever was happening inside her had already begun inside him, too. Chapter 5. The Wolf Beneath Her Skin. The morning had started like any other. Cold air through the windows, the low hum of voices gathering in the grand hall, the sound of boots on marble. Elira stood near the back, head bowed, trying to be small. The council had gathered to discuss the next phase of the trials, and though she was no longer a candidate, she had been assigned to assist the record keepers. She had barely slept the night before. The dreams were worsening, too vivid now, too loud. The amber eyes, the circling wolf, the whisper she couldn't quite make out. It left her trembling each time she woke, the sheets clinging to her skin. But that morning, it wasn't just a dream that followed her. It was something else. She'd been standing beside the pillar, quill in hand, when the dizziness hit. The room tilted. The parchment slipped from her fingers. Her breath came short and uneven. "Are you unwell?" one of the scribes asked. Elira opened her mouth, but the sound that came out wasn't words. It was a low, broken growl that didn't belong to her voice. Then the world went white. She dropped to her knees, clutching at her chest. Every sound sharpened, the scrape of boots, the gasp of the crowd, the rush of blood in her own ears. "Fetch the physician!" someone shouted. But she couldn't hear them anymore, not properly. The hum inside her chest, the one she'd felt for weeks, grew into something heavier. Alive. Her skin burned cold, her heartbeat slowing until everything blurred together. She tried to focus on the floor, on the marble veins swirling beneath her hands, but when she looked up, the world was different. The people looked distant, colours too bright, shadows too deep. And then her reflection, caught in one of the polished shields along the wall. Her eyes weren't brown anymore. They were silver, just for a second, a blink. But everyone saw. The whispers exploded through the room. "Her eyes! She's shifting! That's impossible, she's a null!" Before anyone could reach her, the heavy doors opened with a groan. The guards stepped aside. King Theron entered. "Clear the hall," he said. The words were quiet, but the weight behind them left no room for hesitation. The council froze. "But Your Majesty," one of the advisors began, "I said clear it." Within moments, the grand hall emptied. Advisors, guards, servants, gone. The heavy doors shut with a final echo. Only Elira remained on the floor, still gasping, her palms pressed flat against the cold stone. And Theron. He crossed the space between them without sound. When he reached her, he crouched down, the fabric of his coat brushing against the marble. She flinched. Please, don't look at me like that." "Like what?" His voice was calm. "Like I'm broken." He didn't answer. For a moment he simply looked at her, really looked. Her trembling hands, the sheen of sweat across her forehead, the confusion in her eyes. Then slowly he reached out. "Theron, stop," she whispered. "Whatever this is, it's not real. It's not me." But he didn't stop. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it firmly to his chest, just above his heart. The warmth of his skin met hers. The heartbeat beneath was steady until it wasn't. It faltered, caught, and then something moved. Not in her, but in him. He exhaled sharply, his body tensing as though something deep inside him had just woken. "Elira," he said quietly, his voice rougher now. "My wolf moved when yours did." She froze. "That's not possible." He held her gaze. "It shouldn't be." She shook her head. "I didn't shift. I didn't even—" "You did something," he said. Enough that mine responded. She stared at him, her throat tightening. "But your wolf? Everyone says he's silent." His lips curved, but not in a smile. "They're right." Elira tried to pull her hand away, but he didn't let go. His pulse was quick beneath, her palm steadying only when she met his eyes again. "No alpha king bonds with a mute wolf," she whispered. "Then it's a good thing I've never followed their rules." Her breath caught. She could feel it now, an invisible tether, faint but undeniable, connecting them. It wasn't like the stories where bond marks burned or voices merged. It was quieter than that. Older. Something inside her shifted, though not in body, more like the air inside her lungs recognized his and didn't want to let go. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because I know what it feels like," he said simply. "To live with silence, that's not your fault." The tension between them thickened. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then, as if pulled by some instinct neither of them understood, she reached for the spot where her hand had been resting. A faint light flickered beneath the fabric of his shirt. Theron frowned, glancing down. He pulled back the collar slightly. Elira's breath stopped. There, just below his collarbone, a shimmer of pale gold. Faint but clear, the shape of a bond mark, freshly formed, pulsing softly under his skin. Her mark. It shouldn't exist. The bond between wolves was sacred and irreversible, a recognition between souls that had already spoken to one another in the language of instinct. She didn't even have a voice for her wolf. There was no possible way this could happen. "Theron," she whispered. "No, this can't—" But he didn't move. His hand came to rest gently at the base of her neck, steadying her trembling form. "Look at me," he said. She did. "This wasn't your doing," he said quietly. "This is ours." Outside, the murmurs of the court began to rise. Someone must have seen the light beneath the doors. The royal physician was the first to return, followed by the council, their robes sweeping the floor. Their faces froze at the sight, Theron standing, Elira still on the ground, his shirt undone just enough to reveal the faint gold shimmer beneath his skin. The hall erupted in noise. "What is that?" "It's the king's mark. Impossible." She bewitched him. "Silence!" Theron's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. But no one truly silenced. The council members huddled near the dais, muttering in disbelief. The physician knelt to inspect the mark. "Your Majesty, this cannot be. There are no records of such a manifestation. The bond cannot form without dual resonance." Theron's expression didn't change. And yet it has. Elira wanted to speak, to deny it, to explain that she hadn't done anything. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at the mark that should have been hers, now glowing faintly on his skin instead. The council recovered enough to speak again. "This union is unnatural," one elder snapped. "A null cannot bond with an alpha king. It goes against the laws of lineage." "Annul it," another hissed, "before it spreads." Theron turned his head slowly toward them, his voice steady. "You would annul the will of the bond?" "It's not the bond's will. It's an infection," the elder said. "We cannot allow corruption to touch the royal bloodline." Elira flinched at the word infection. Theron's gaze softened when he saw her expression, but his tone remained calm. "You speak of bloodlines and purity as if they grant you authority over what's sacred." "This is her doing," the elder insisted. She tricked fate or cursed it." Elira finally found her voice. It came out soft, shaking. "I didn't ask for this." Theron's reply came quietly, but every syllable carried the weight of command. Nor did I. But here it stands. He took a step closer to her. The glow of the mark seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. You all claim to honor the moon's will, he said to the council. Then tell me, when has the moon ever asked permission before choosing? The elders fell silent. The physician rose slowly, his face pale. Your Majesty, if the mark completes, it will be irreversible. I know. Then you risk binding yourself to someone who... Theron's hand lifted slightly. Enough! The man stopped. Elira couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. The air around her felt charged, every sound distant except for the steady beat of his heart. The same rhythm she had felt through her hand moments ago. This will destroy your reputation, she said softly. They'll call you weak. Theron's gaze met hers. They already do. He said it without bitterness, just truth. The mark glowed again, brighter now before fading back to a soft shimmer. What happens now? She whispered. He studied her, then said, Now we see if what they call impossible chooses to stay impossible. Outside, the council murmured among themselves, already planning a hearing, a way to undo what had begun. But none of their words reached Elira, because when she looked at him, she saw it again. The quiet recognition. The same look he had given her in the garden, in the hall, on the balcony. Only now it wasn't curiosity. It was a connection. And she understood with a sudden calm that the bond wasn't just a mistake. It was alive. The mark beneath his collarbone pulsed once more, steady and faint. The council demanded annulment, but neither of them moved, because the bond had already started to seal. Chapter 6. The Elders Declare It Heresy. The news spread faster than anyone could contain it. By the time the sun rose over the palace walls, the elders were already on their way. Messengers rode from the 4 provinces, bearing the royal seal and carrying questions no one dared answer aloud. Elira could feel the weight of every stare in the halls. Servants stopped talking when she passed. Courtiers whispered as if the walls themselves would carry their words to the king. The mark that had appeared on Theron's chest, the bond that should have been impossible, had divided the realm before the moon had even waned. By the 3rd day, the elders arrived. 4 of them, each representing one of the ancient provinces, north, east, west, and south. They were not men of mercy. Their faces were lined with age and pride, their robes heavy with the symbols of their ranks. They met in the throne chamber. Elira wasn't supposed to be there, but Theron insisted she stay. The hall was filled with the scent of burning sage and tension. This is not a true bond, said Elder Corrin of the North, his voice sharp as flint. No unshifted wolf can awaken the royal mark. It goes against every law of nature and blood. Elder Vera of the East nodded, her silver hair catching the light. It is false. A fabrication, likely the result of deceit. Or witchcraft. Theron sat in silence at the head of the hall, his expression unreadable. Elira stood beside the dais, her hands clasped in front of her. Every accusation stung, but none surprised her. She had heard variations of the same her whole life. A cursed wolf, a mistake of the moon, a voice that was never meant to be born. The elders continued. This girl has bewitched the king, Corrin said, pointing a trembling finger toward her. If she is not severed from him now, the mark will corrupt his lineage. It must be undone. How? Theron asked quietly. The question silenced the room. Elder Vera exchanged a glance with the others before answering. There is one way. The cleansing. The word made Elira's blood run cold. She had heard stories of it, whispers told to scare young wolves into obedience. A ritual meant to break false or weak bonds through pain, stripping both wolves of any connection they shared. Many didn't survive it. Theron rose slowly from his seat. No. It must be done, Corrin pressed. If the bond is pure, it will endure. If not, it will die. I said no. The air thickened. His authority filled the room like a storm pressing against the walls. But the elders didn't bow. Your Majesty, Vera said carefully, if the bond is genuine, the cleansing will not harm her. It will prove her innocence before the realm. If it is not, she won't survive, he finished, voice flat. Elira could feel the tremor in her hands. She stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. I'll do it. Theron turned to her, eyes narrowing. No. She met his gaze. Yes. Elira, you don't understand what it entails. I do, she said. I've heard the stories. Then you know it's torture. I know it's truth. The silence between them stretched, heavy and full. I have lived my entire life being called cursed, she continued. If I refuse this, they'll keep calling me that. They'll keep calling you bewitched. This is the only way to end it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't need to prove anything. I do, she whispered. Not to them, to myself. His jaw tightened. You could die. Then let me die doing something that finally means something. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Theron exhaled slowly, like the sound was dragged from deep inside him. If one drop of her blood is spilled without my order, he said, turning to the elders, you'll answer to me. Elder Corrin inclined his head slightly. As the law demands, Your Majesty. The preparations began that night. The cleansing circle was built in the temple courtyard, white stone carved with old symbols, fire pits burning at its edges. The smell of smoke clung to the air, heavy and bitter. Elira was stripped of jewelry, her wrists bound with silver-threaded cords that shimmered faintly under the torchlight. The metal burned faintly against her skin. She didn't flinch. Theron stood at the edge of the circle, forbidden to intervene once the ritual began. His face was pale under the torchlight, his hands clenched behind his back. Begin, said Elder Vera. The chanting started low, an old language that twisted like wind through the stones. The symbols beneath Elira's feet began to glow. She felt it first as heat, then as something deeper, an invisible hand pressing against her chest. Her knees buckled. She gasped, clutching at the burning cords around her wrists. The elders' voices rose louder. The glow spread from the circle into her veins, silver lines crawling up her arms like lightning. Stop! She heard Theron's voice somewhere distant. That's enough. The elders ignored him. Pain tore through her, sharp and deep. It wasn't like being burned, it was like being pulled apart, as if something inside her was being peeled away. Her wolf, silent all her life, stirred for the first time, not as a sound, but as pressure. Memory. She fell forward, gasping. Please, she whispered, though she didn't know if she was speaking to them or to the thing inside her. And then, through the pain, something shifted. Not her body, not her bones, her memory. A flash of the woods, a child's laughter, a woman's voice calling a name. Elira. A hand reaching out, then darkness. Her breath hitched. The heat grew unbearable. Her body shook violently, light spilling from her palms. Theron shouted her name, his voice breaking through the chanting. But the elders continued, their faces grim and unmoving. Elira! Her vision blurred. She could barely see him through the light. Theron, she gasped, reaching out. And then she heard it. A voice. Not hers. Not human. A whisper so soft it could have been part of the wind. You were never meant to be silent. The light around her flared. The cords snapped. The elders stumbled back, shielding their eyes. Theron ran forward, ignoring their protests, reaching her just as her knees gave way. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her eyes still open but unfocused. Elira, stay with me, he said, his voice low but frantic. She blinked slowly, trying to form words. It spoke. His heart pounded beneath her ear. What did? My wolf, she whispered. It said my name. Before he could answer, his body jerked suddenly. His breath hitched. He pressed a hand to his chest. The mark beneath his collarbone flared gold. Elira's eyes widened. Theron? He collapsed to his knees beside her, his expression twisting in shock. I heard it too, he managed, voice strained. The same voice? She whispered. He nodded once, struggling to breathe. It called your name. The elders stood frozen, their chanting silenced. The glow from the circle dimmed, leaving only the flicker of the torches and the faint gold shimmer pulsing beneath Theron's skin. Elira's head rested against his chest. Their heartbeats, two separate rhythms, slowed, then fell into perfect sync. In that moment, the courtyard was silent. Not even the wind dared move. And for the first time, both of them understood. The bond wasn't just alive, it was remembering. Chapter 7. The memory that was buried. The world outside Elira's window blurred into mist. For 3 days after the cleansing, she drifted in and out of sleep, her body heavy, her mind full of fragments that didn't fit together. Sometimes she woke gasping, hands trembling as if reaching for something just beyond her grasp. Other times she'd find Theron sitting by the window, silent but watchful, a faint bruise still shadowing his jaw where he'd fallen during the ritual. The mark on his chest hadn't faded. It pulsed softly when he was near her, as if echoing her heartbeat. The court had tried to keep its distance, but whispers filled every corridor now. The king and the cursed wolf, bound by something no law could explain. On the 4th morning, a knock came at the door. It was Holden, the palace historian, a frail man whose ink-stained fingers never stopped twitching. Your Majesty, he murmured to Theron, bowing, I found something. You need to see this. Elira stirred from her bed, her voice hoarse. What is it? Holden hesitated, glancing between them. Records, old ones. Sealed before your reign, my lord. I was reviewing archives for precedent on false bonds and... He trailed off, lowering his voice. There are mentions of a child. A healer's daughter taken during the Red Pine border raid. Never returned. Elira's breath caught. A child? Holden nodded. Her name was hidden in the record, but the mother's wasn't. Mireia of the Ash Valley. She served the royal court once, long before the rebellion. Theron's brow furrowed. Mireia... He repeated the name as though it scratched at something buried deep. She vanished the same winter my wolf went silent, he said finally, voice quiet. I was 8. The rebellion at the southern border had just begun. Elira shifted, sitting up fully despite the dizziness that followed. What happened to her? Holden clasped his trembling hands. According to witness accounts, the woman was executed by rebels for refusing to heal their wounded. Her daughter was taken. The body was never found. The king at the time declared her presumed dead. A hush filled the room. Elira's pulse quickened. I was born in Red Pine, she said slowly, but I don't remember anything before I was 6. My father said we moved there after the war. Holden nodded gravely. The timing matches. He unfolded a parchment from his satchel. These are the sealed reports. Your name, Elira, isn't written anywhere, but your age, the location, the physical description. He looked up at her. It's you. She shook her head. That doesn't make sense. My father... Theron's voice cut in softly. Was he really your father? Elira opened her mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. The memory she'd glimpsed during the cleansing pressed against her thoughts, a woman's hands soft and warm, a voice whispering her name, Elira, run. And then, the flash of fire, the sound of hooves, a man shouting, her chest tightened. I don't know. Holden set the parchment down on the table. I thought you both should see it before the council decides what to do next. When he left, silence stretched between them. Theron moved to the window, his voice distant. That winter I went with my father to the border. We were to secure the villages before the rebels reached the capital. One night a raid broke out near the healers' camp. There was fire everywhere. Screaming, Elira's throat felt dry. You remember it? He nodded. Barely. But I remember her. The healer. She tended to my arm when I was injured. She had a little girl with her. Quiet. Hiding behind her skirts. She had the same eyes as you. She looked away, heart hammering. My wolf, he continued, his tone tightening, went silent that night. I thought it was fear, or loss. But now I think it was something else. Elira's voice trembled. What do you mean? He turned back to her. I think he recognized something I didn't. You. She shook her head. That's not possible. I would have remembered. Not if someone made you forget. The idea sent a chill through her. Why would anyone do that? Theron crossed to her side, crouching so they were level. Because you were taken, hidden, raised as someone else's child to keep you from being found. Maybe to protect you. Maybe to use you. Her mind reeled. My father. Wasn't your father, he said gently. He was one of Red Pine's southern lieutenants, loyal to the old rebellion. Elira's breath hitched. She remembered his bitterness, the way he'd always looked at her like she was a reminder of something he despised. He said I was cursed, that my wolf was weak. Theron's eyes softened. He wanted you to believe that, because if you ever remembered what you were, you'd come back here, to me. She looked down at her trembling hands. So I wasn't cursed, she murmured, just lost. Buried, he said quietly. Your wolf didn't fail to rise. It was forced into silence. The truth hit harder than she expected. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. All these years, I thought there was something wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with you, he said firmly. They made you believe it to keep you small. The firelight flickered across his face, tracing the faint gold shimmer that still marked his collarbone. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, softly, Elira asked, And your wolf? Why did it stop? He hesitated. Because it lost something it couldn't name. She looked up. Me. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The air between them thickened with memory, things unspoken but felt. When she finally found her voice again, it was barely more than a whisper. If what you're saying is true, then everything that's happened, it wasn't chance. The bond, the dreams, the way we... She couldn't finish. Theron's gaze held hers. It wasn't fate either, he said. It was unfinished. The words settled in her chest like a key turning in a long locked door. He rose slowly, offering his hand. There's something else you should see. He led her through the palace's west wing, where the oldest archives were kept. The air was thick with dust and old parchment. At the back of the room stood a wooden chest bound in iron. He knelt, unlocking it with a key from around his neck. Inside lay relics, letters, tokens, small keepsakes. He lifted a folded piece of cloth and handed it to her. I kept this, he said quietly. It was a child's shawl, torn along one edge, faded, but still soft. Embroidered near the corner were the initials E.M. Elira traced the stitching with a shaking finger. Elira Mireia, she whispered. My mother's name. She wrapped you in it that night, he said, before she gave you to a messenger. He rode through the smoke with you in his arms. He told my father he'd deliver you to the safe camp. But I never made it there, she said. Theron nodded. The messenger was ambushed. Red Pine soldiers found you first. It all made sense now, the missing years, the false memories, the pain she couldn't name. The silence wasn't a curse, it was survival. She sank to her knees, clutching the shawl. All this time? Theron knelt beside her, his voice steady but low. When the cleansing forced your wolf awake, it broke. Whatever seal they placed on your memory, that's why we both heard her voice. Your mother's. She was calling for you, calling for me. Elira lifted her gaze. For you? He nodded. She told me once, before the raids, that her daughter would carry something special, something old. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Her throat tightened. We were bound even then. Before we ever had the chance, he said softly. The weight of it sank between them. All the years apart, the pain, the loneliness, it wasn't meaningless. It was the echo of something torn in half and finally finding its way back. Elira exhaled shakily, pressing the shawl to her chest. Then everything they said about me was a lie. Yes, he said. And it ends now. He rose, offering her his hand again. She took it this time, steadying herself. Outside, the bells from the eastern tower began to toll. A storm was coming. They both felt it, the quiet before the next reckoning. Elira glanced at him. What will you tell them? The truth, he said simply. They won't believe it. He met her eyes. Then I'll make them. As they stood in the dim archive, a cold gust swept through, stirring the parchments and extinguishing the nearest lantern. For a brief moment they were left in half-darkness, the gold shimmer on his chest faintly visible. Elira reached out, her fingers brushing the mark. It was never fate, she murmured. It was memory. Theron's voice was soft, and memory always finds its way home. Her heart ached, not with fear but with something old and aching that finally made sense. She hadn't been cursed, she'd been buried, and now she was rising. Chapter 8. When the wolf finally speaks. The summons came at dusk, carried by a young guard whose hands trembled as he delivered it. The council has ordered the final trial, he said, eyes flicking toward Elira, before quickly darting away. You're to appear at moonrise. Elira folded the parchment and nodded. Thank you. When the door closed, she stood there for a long while, the fire in her chamber burning low. The words on the page were simple, formal. Yet beneath them she could feel the weight of everything that had led her here, the whispers, the tests, the bond that refused to fade no matter how many laws tried to deny it. The trial wasn't about strength, or lineage, or worth. It was about choice. If she chose to break the bond, the council would be free to strip her of any claim. If she refused, she risked everything, the king's reign, her own life, the fragile balance of a kingdom already divided by doubt. But Elira wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them. Not of the silence that had once ruled her. When Theron entered, she didn't turn. She already knew his steps. The measured rhythm that carried the calm of command and the exhaustion of a man who had spent his life holding back. They won't stop until they get what they want, he said quietly. Elira looked up at him. And what is it they want? To see you fall. Her voice was steady. Then I'll show them I can stand. He came closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. His expression softened. You don't have to prove anything, not to them. I know, she said. This isn't for them. His jaw tightened. If they force a rejection, the pain will... I've lived with worse, she interrupted. There was nothing more to say. He studied her for a long moment, then reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. If anything happens... Don't finish that sentence, she said softly. We both know you won't let it. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. When the moon rose above the palace, its silver light spilling across the courtyard stones, the bells rang. The trial had begun. The assembly gathered in the high court. Elders, advisors, noble wolves from every province. Torches flickered against the marble walls, the light unsteady. The atmosphere was colder than winter. Elira walked alone into the centre of the hall, her steps echoing. The gown she wore was plain, white linen tied with a simple cord at the waist. Her hair was loose, her face bare. She looked neither royal nor cursed, just real. Theron stood near the dais, surrounded by his council, though none dared meet his gaze. Elder Corin's voice carried through the chamber. Elira of Redpine, you stand accused of forging a false bond through manipulation of the king's dormant wolf. You are granted one final chance to renounce it. Speak now. Elira raised her chin. And if I don't? Then the court will judge whether what binds you is of truth or delusion, Corin said. If false, it will be severed by force, the crowd murmured. Theron took a step forward, but one of the guards blocked him. This is her trial, not yours, Majesty, the elder warned. Elira looked at Theron briefly, her heart steady. She could feel it again, the pulse of that invisible tether between them. Still there. Still warm. I won't reject it, she said clearly. The hall went silent. Elder Vera frowned. You would claim this bond after what it has cost the realm. This bond didn't break the realm, Elira replied. Fear did. Then prove it, Corin snapped. Prove that this bond was not born of trauma but of truth. She hesitated, her voice quiet but firm. I can't prove it with words. Then you will be silent once more, he said bitterly. Her eyes met his. No, she whispered. Not this time. The first tremor rippled through her chest. She staggered, her breath catching. The moonlight struck her from the high windows above, washing her in pale silver. The mark on Theron's collarbone flickered like a flame responding. To wind. Elira, he called, his voice cutting through the panic. What's happening? She didn't answer, her hands pressed against the marble floor as a low vibration filled the air, deep and resonant. Some in the crowd backed away. Others whispered prayers. Elder Vera gasped. It's happening again? Restrain her. But Theron didn't move. His eyes never left her. The glow beneath her skin spread. Not gold this time, but silver, soft and steady. Her breaths came slow, controlled, as though something inside her had finally decided to breathe for itself. And then it happened. The shift. It wasn't violent. There was no scream, no sound of bones breaking. The transformation unfolded like water finding its shape. Graceful, inevitable. Her body bowed forward, silver light spilling from her spine, her fingers curling against the floor until her palms met stone. The linen tore softly as her form changed, fur glimmering under the moonlight. Gasps filled the chamber. A wolf now stood where Elira had been. Not white, not black, silver. Her eyes opened, brighter than any human gaze, calm and unafraid. The room was still. No one dared move. Elder Corin's voice shook. This isn't possible. Theron stepped past the guards before they could stop him, descending the dais steps slowly. The wolf turned her head toward him. Elira, he whispered. She moved closer, each step silent on the stone. The bond pulsed between them, visible now, a faint shimmer of light that stretched from her chest to his. And then, before the court could speak or breathe, his body shuddered. He fell to one knee, one hand pressed against the mark on his chest. The gold light flared, then deepened, merging with the silver radiance from her. The sound that followed wasn't a roar. It wasn't pain. It was relief. A single exhale that carried years of silence breaking apart. The court watched in disbelief as the same light rippled through him, outlining his frame before his form began to shift. No one had seen the Alpha King's wolf in decades. The guards dropped to their knees. The elders fell silent. When the light faded, a dark wolf stood beside the silver one. Taller, older, his fur streaked with faint threads of gold. His eyes, the same storm grey as Theron's, met hers. For a long moment the two simply stood there, breathing the same air. Then, slowly, she stepped closer, lowering her head until it brushed his neck. He leaned into the touch. The faint hum between them deepened until it filled the hall, steady, rhythmic, like the sound of two heartbeats aligning. Every doubt vanished. Every whisper silenced itself. Two wolves, one bond, no more questions. The elders could do nothing but watch. The mark had sealed, two colours merging, gold and silver, one intertwined flame that pulsed softly in the air before fading into both of them. Theron lifted his head and howled once, not to command but to acknowledge. The sound rolled through the marble halls, deep and certain. Elira's wolf joined his. Her voice, silent for years, rose beside his in perfect harmony. The sound wasn't wild, it wasn't fierce, it was calm, whole. When the echoes faded, the court stood in reverent quiet. Elder Vera's voice trembled. What? What does this mean? Theron shifted back slowly, his breath heavy but steady. He reached for a cloak and draped it over Elira's shoulders as she returned to human form. It means, he said, his voice even, that what you called heresy was the truth all along. Elira met his eyes, her hands clutching the cloak. The moonlight framed them both, the faint shimmer of their sealed mark glowing through the fabric. The bond had chosen, and the silence that had defined them for so long had finally spoken. Chapter 9. The ones who tried to silence her. The palace felt different now. The walls that once watched her like quiet judges now stood in respectful silence. The guards nodded when she passed. Servants no longer flinched or whispered. Elira walked the halls without needing to hide her steps, her eyes or the quiet hum that still lived beneath her ribs. Not pain, but certainty. The bond mark had sealed. Her wolf had risen. The court had bowed. But not everyone had. The day after the trial, word spread fast. A new arrival at the gates. Not summoned. Not welcomed. The Red Pine Alpha. He came without banners, without guards, without warning. Only arrogance. His cloak was dusted with travel, but his stance was proud, shoulders stiff beneath old rank and rusted certainty. Elira stood in the solar when they told her. "He's in the audience hall," said the steward, "demanding your return." She didn't flinch. "I'll go." Theron rose from his seat across from her. Not alone. She looked at him and shook her head. "Not behind me. Beside me." He didn't smile, but he stepped into place at her side. They entered the hall together, quiet and deliberate. The Red Pine Alpha turned the moment the doors opened. His expression twisted. Disbelief first, then something sharper. "Impossible," he muttered. Elira said nothing at first. She walked until she stood 10 feet from him, and for once she did not lower her gaze. "You weren't invited," she said calmly. His voice snapped like frost. "You belong to Red Pine. You are of my pack. I decide where you stand." Theron's voice was steady. "You decide nothing here," the Alpha sneered. "You've bonded with a null. You call that justice." Elira stepped forward once, her tone cold. "You call what you did to me just?" He scoffed. "I gave you shelter when your own parents were gone. I fed you when you brought shame to our gates." "You silenced me," she said. "You told me I was broken. You turned your back every time I tried to ask who I really was." "You were weak." "No," she said, louder now. "I was wounded, and you made sure I stayed that way." The court watched in silence. Some stood at the edge of the room. Others peered from behind pillars. No one interrupted. Theron remained where he was, at her side, not in front. He didn't raise his voice, didn't command the room, he didn't need to. Elira drew a breath. "You're not here for me. You're here to protect what's left of your control." The Alpha stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You're still part of my pack." "No," she said. "I was stolen by it, lied to, held down." He didn't speak. His jaw worked, but the words didn't come. Elira turned to face the court. "There are others like me, born different, quieter, not less. You call them nulls. Cast them aside. You think if a wolf doesn't speak the way you expect, it must be silent." She stepped to the center of the room. "But I was never silent. I was never cursed. I was buried." A quiet fell over the room, the kind that follows truth, not anger. She looked back at the Red Pine Alpha. "You will never speak for me again." Theron finally moved then, stepping forward beside her. "From this day," he said, "no wolf may be declared null without standing for a bond trial under Crown supervision." Gasps echoed. The Alpha's face darkened. "You would change centuries of law for her?" Theron's voice was low. No, for all the ones you tried to silence. A hush rippled through the crowd. Elder Vera stepped forward slowly. The proposal is sound. It ensures truth over tradition, and mercy over fear. Corin, though still stiff, nodded. Let it be written. Let it be law. The Alpha said nothing. He looked at Elira one last time, not with regret, but with the quiet dread of a man who had underestimated the girl he'd tried to break. He turned and left. No one stopped him. Outside, the snow had begun to fall, soft, slow. Elira watched it through the arched window after the crowd had dispersed. Theron came to stand beside her. You didn't need me, he said quietly. I did, she replied, but not to speak for me. He looked at her for a long moment. There's a difference. She nodded. They stood in silence for a time, watching the snow settle across the stone paths. Behind them, the law was being written in ink and seal. Justice didn't arrive with a roar. It arrived gently, but it arrived. Chapter 10. The bond they said would never form. The sacred clearing had been silent for hours before the ceremony began. No drums, no horns, no fanfare. Just snow falling like breath onto the soft moss, and the moon waiting patiently above the trees. Elira stood barefoot in the centre of the glade, her cloak draped over her shoulders, her pulse steady beneath her skin. Around her, wolves from all provinces had gathered in a wide circle, some still in their human forms, others standing silent in the shapes of their wolves. She had been here once before, long ago, a child, watching from the edge, wondering what it felt like to be chosen. Now, she was not watching. She was the one they'd come to witness. The elders stood quietly, their objections long faded into reluctant respect. Even Corin bowed his head when she passed. Vera, once suspicious, now stood with her hands clasped, eyes soft and unreadable. Elira didn't look for her parents. She knew they wouldn't come, and for the first time in her life that absence didn't ache. She had stopped needing their approval the day she learned to speak without words. The wind moved through the clearing, cool and clean. Theron stepped forward. He wore no crown, no armour, just a plain black tunic, sleeves rolled to the elbow, collar low enough to reveal the faint gold shimmer of the bond mark beneath his collarbone. Their bond had sealed weeks ago, but tonight was about choice, about recognition, about the act of saying yes again, freely, without force, before the eyes of the pack. Theron stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence was not uncomfortable, it was reverent. Elira raised her hand slowly, the tips of her fingers hovering just above his chest. She looked into his eyes, grey and still, steady as ever, and saw no hesitation. No command, only trust. She pressed her palm gently to his skin. The bond responded instantly, a slow bloom of light where gold met silver, swirling into a soft, shared glow. A hum passed through the clearing, not loud, not showy, just a quiet acknowledgement that something sacred had finished what it began. Theron bowed his head, not because ceremony required it, but because he chose to. Elira moved her fingers to the centre of his chest, where the light pulsed strongest. I give you what was always yours, she said, voice quiet but clear. I receive what I never forgot, he replied. His hand rose, resting lightly over hers. The light held, then faded. But the bond stayed. Elira felt it, not as heat or ache, but as a stillness in her bones. A deep calm that came not from victory but from being seen. Chosen. Wolves in the circle lowered their heads, not because they were commanded, but because they understood. This was not tradition. This was truth. Theron turned to face the assembly. No more trials, he said simply. No more silence. And then he stepped back, letting Elira take the centre. She stood alone, the moonlight silver on her hair, the snow catching in the folds of her cloak. For every wolf who was told they were wrong for being quiet, she said, I speak now. Her voice didn't tremble. I was not weak. I was waiting. A few wolves in the crowd shifted then, slowly, quietly. Wolves who had never stepped forward during other ceremonies. Wolves once labelled lesser, overlooked. Elira saw them. She nodded once. You don't have to roar to be real, she said. Theron's wolf stepped forward then, shifting silently beside her. His form was steady, dark, his presence grounding. Elira shifted too. The silver of her coat caught the moonlight like water. They stood together side by side. Two wolves bonded not by rules or ritual, but by memory and choice. The crowd didn't cheer. They bowed, not out of fear, out of understanding, because the story that had once been hidden beneath shame and silence had found its voice, and it spoke not in thunder, but in calm. Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the clearing emptied, Elira remained at the centre. The snow had lightened to flurries, the wind had calmed. Theron approached, still barefoot, still unguarded. He didn't speak at first. She didn't need him to. He sat beside her on the stone, close enough to feel the heat of his body, but not pressing, just near. I never believed the bond would form, she said softly. I did, he replied. I just didn't know how long it would take to find its voice. She turned to him. Was it always there? He nodded. Buried, but waiting. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes on the dark line of trees ahead. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter than the snow. It never needed to be loud. He touched her hand, lacing their fingers together. It only needed to be heard. The moon rose higher, full and round. The sacred glade, once a place of judgment and tradition, now held something else. Peace. The story they'd written, etched in silence, shaped by trial, sealed in bond, didn't end with a crown or a victory cry. It ended here, with a once silent wolf who had finally found her voice, and the mate who heard it before anyone else ever did.